Alchemists, welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and thank you so much for joining our community for another incredible connection. If you're listening for the first time, welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Take a minute before continuing the episode to follow our Instagram at Elemental Educator, and for those returning alchemists, take some time to expand our community and share this platform with one other person today. I'm so thankful for your passion and dedication to being better together. Now get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Comeau.
Today, I'm thrilled to connect with Dr. Rachelle Dené Poth, an EdTech consultant, presenter, attorney, author, and teacher of Spanish and STEAM, emerging technology. Rachelle has a Juris Doctor degree from Duquesne University School of Law, a master's and a doctorate in instructional technology. Rachelle specializes in artificial intelligence, AI, and the law, AR, VR, cybersecurity, SEL, and STEM. She has more than 7 years of teaching and presenting on AI in her classroom and working with educators worldwide. Rachelle is an ISTE certified educator and recipient of the ISTE Making It Happen Award and several presidential gold and silver awards for volunteer service. Rachelle presents regularly at conferences and provides professional development and coaching for educators, as well as keynotes with a strong focus on emerging technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, and the law, cybersecurity, SEL, and STEM. She's the author of 9 books, including her most recent book, How to Teach AI, Weaving Strategies and Activities into Any Content Area. She's a blogger for Check IT Learning, Defined Learning, Edutopia, and Getting Smart. Rachelle is also a podcaster. Contact Rachelle through www.rdene915.com, or I'll link her other contact for professional development in our description. Welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast, Rachelle. It is a pleasure to have you here with us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and for the long introduction, but it's great to be here to talk with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the long introduction. You know, I hummed and hawed over whether or not we should do long introductions for people. I love to establish who they are and give the listener really a chance to know who it is that's on the other end of this and create that connection, because the experience you're bringing to this and the conversation we're going to have is built from who you are. So that intro is so powerful for me. And so is the first question, which is, how did you get to where you are now?
Oh my gosh. How long do we have for this answer? Because
well, if
no,
it's
I'm
the
kidding.
full episode, it's the full episode.
No, it's interesting. Like, if you would have said to me, and I tell my students this all the time as well, the fact that I'm teaching Spanish, first of all, when I took French in high school and college, is just mind-boggling to me, because I would have never thought that for myself. And I think the way that I got to where I am is just by taking opportunities where I would see them and taking some risks, and just, I don't know, I've always been excited about learning. My parents were very much into seeing that I learned and taking classes. I couldn't get a job when I first graduated from college, just teaching French. So I went back and got the Spanish degree, and I just continued to get different degrees. And somehow, when I look back on all of the things that I've done since all that time ago, graduating with my undergrad degree, it's interesting how I ended up where I am today, but how all of the things that I've done kind of have come full circle together, and I'm using everything, even though, like I said, I would have never thought, like when I was in high school, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing this someday. So I take chances with things, and I really like to learn and share that learning with others. And it's fun. I like being involved in a lot of different spaces and meeting people and sharing that learning with my students, and hopefully inspiring some of them to, like, enjoy Spanish, because they might end up teaching French someday, like do the opposite of me. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, I like to keep busy. I guess that's probably the shortest way to answer as to how I got to where I am today.
And that's a common theme among people in leadership, people that strive to be better, is keeping busy, and that idea of not getting complacent in the situation you're in. With that, though, Your work spans so many areas from AI to world languages, and part of the Elemental Educator is unpacking the earth, which is our core values and what's really rooted us through all of these, because there's a constant theme no matter what you take on why you're doing what you're doing. So what core values have guided you throughout this multifaceted career?
Yeah, well, if you would have asked me this question probably 10 years ago, I probably would not have been able to identify it. But over the last couple of years, I've come up with an acronym, which is my Thrive. And that is comprised of each letter, of course, stands for something. And it was relevant to me. And as I thought about the work that I was doing and things that I was doing in my classroom with my students, I thought, yeah, I kind of doing this. And I'll tell you that in Thrive, it's tenacity, honesty, relatability, integrity, vulnerability, and empathy. And so I think that for me, I try to keep those in mind, but I also try to use those, whether I'm working with my students or working with other educators, and think about how important those characteristics and qualities are for us, not just in our work as educators, but just in general as people in whatever we do. Because, for example, whenever I'm vulnerable with my students. Now, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have shared stories about my experiences as a student or anything more personal because that's not the way that I was taught. But I read the book by Brene Brown and talked about the power of vulnerability, referencing a great speech by Teddy Roosevelt years ago. And I thought, yeah, that's how you connect with people. When you're vulnerable, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And then the tenacity, to keep on going, and all of those, words that make up my Thrive acronym are things that I think are important, and I know are important, not just on an everyday basis, but in preparing students for what they need to be ready for the future. And so when you talk about things like lifelong learning and adaptability and being flexible and all of that, I feel like those are all wrapped up in each of those words. And so for me, that's kind of what guides me, is even when I get stressed out about something, I try to push through. So I'm like, all right, I could do this. I have the tenacity to do it. Or if I make mistakes in my classroom or wherever, I'm honest. And I share that with people, and, I make myself vulnerable. But I think those are, for me personally, that's what I tend to focus on the most in all areas of the work that I do.
Now, with that, how did you come to pick these 6 that create what Thrive is?
That's another interesting question. There's always a story.
Off script a little bit.
Yeah, the words, I was trying to think of something that just resonated. I was doing some writing a couple of years ago on one of my books, and it was about lessons that we learn from students. And the whole concept around it was if you've ever said, no, that's a true story, that really happened. And people are like, no way, no way. And I decided to write a book about lessons that these kids taught us. And as the stories were coming in, I started to see some common themes through them. And it was also at the time where I was trying to come up with a name for my LLC and just a lot of different things. And I just sat down one day and I looked through the stories, and then I thought about my own experiences, and the word Thrive kind of stuck with me. And I tried to think about, what do those letters stand for? And some of them came to me very easily. The V for vulnerability was a given. Honesty, the empathy really stuck out. And then I looked back through the stories, because I had from 50 educators, 49 others, one being myself. I looked at the stories through that lens of some of those words, and I could see those coming through their stories. And so when I had actually written that book, I divided it into those themes, but it was hard sometimes because some of them had all of them wrapped up in one. And it stuck with me. And that's been probably about 5 or 6 years now, I think. Thrive as a word itself is something that I've always kind of been drawn to, trying to thrive in everything I do. So I don't know, maybe it's been a long-standing thing. I just didn't really understand or see so clearly until I actually sat down to think through it and what I was doing in my classroom. And then, of course, listening and learning from the other stories.
And, one of the things my letters to numbers might not be great here, but I think Thrive has 6 letters in it, which correlates to 6 values. And one of the things that I push is values, when they're rooted deeply within you, should range somewhere between 3 to 5. So I'm going to put you on the spot and challenge you here. Within your Thrive model, what would be the top 3 that you lean on the most?
Oh, goodness. When I have to pick, let's see. I definitely, for me, it is the vulnerability is one of the 3. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the first one. The empathy is big with me as well, because as I've changed as an educator since going through law school and everything, I've really been able to build relationships and see the importance of that and understanding others and what their experiences are and really getting to know them. And the relatability also, at least in my classroom, my experience, I think those are the ones that stand out for me. Not that the other 3 are not important, because they really are. And that's, honesty is important, integrity is important, tenacity, of course. But I think when we're looking at the work that we do as educators, or just, anyone, it's the human skills and understanding each other and building. We always hear about the building relationships and how important that is. And I think that those values, the 3 that I picked, align with that more, because you're going to get to know somebody by sharing your experiences and being vulnerable, and that's going to in turn help them. And empathy, of course, is another one that's huge. And so yeah, you did a little bit on the spot, but that's okay.
I like that. And you know what, vulnerability is not what I would say in my top 5, but it's definitely something that I work on as well. I've often been told you're a robot where you are, because you're so structured in the things that you do. And I've taken some time to really work on being vulnerable and opening up and letting people see that, we are human too, in whatever position we're in, and it's okay to make mistakes and fail forward and learn from that process.
Right.
With all of that, a vulnerable moment from you is probably the collaboration with educators worldwide in one of your books, Things I Wish Knew. So how has the process of amplifying other voices influenced your own professional grounding?
Yeah, that taking on, several of the things that I've written, I've gotten stories from other educators, and that one was by far the biggest. And it did pull in educators from around the world, and so many stories. And one, the impact is kind of like reading it and knowing, like, oh yeah, or feeling, I went through that too. There's somebody else out there. It's not just me that has experienced something. And it helps me realize that it's okay to make mistakes, or it's okay to not know all the things, or be an expert. And so I definitely learned a lot from reading their stories, but it also made me more mindful of, or even more aware and tuned in to the needs of my students, to being, to the importance of, being connected with colleagues and making time for others. Because reading these stories, there were times, and I read the stories multiple times each, but there were times that, I was like nodding my head in agreement, like, yes, I've been there and it's not just me. And times where I was laughing, like, yep, happened in my classroom too. And then there were times that I was crying, because some of the stories they're sad, but they're things that you go through. And the ... is because when I was going to write the book, it was going to be things I wish I knew when I started teaching. But I thought, that's just personal to me. So I opened it up, and the ... is filled in by things I wish parents, families, administrators, students, whoever, and even some stories of when I started teaching, for people to fill in what came naturally to them to write about that they could share to help others. So I learned a lot from the 49 other educators' stories that are in there that have really helped me to improve in my practice and be more mindful of things that I wasn't necessarily aware of before having read their stories.
I love that. And just like the show I'm running here and connecting with people, I'm learning so much along the way, just in things people do in their own worlds that I should consider doing in mine too. And so thank you so much for sharing the process of how that book came to be and the influence it's had on you as well. Yeah. With all of this, you're a strong advocate for SEL and essential skills. How do these areas intersect with your belief in fostering meaningful connections in education?
Yeah, this is an interesting one too, because talking about vulnerability and being honest about making mistakes and things, or the things I wish I knew, over the years, there have been so many things that I've done in my classroom, and I thought I was doing them the right way. And then I'm like, yep, nope, no clue. I was totally way off on that one. And with SEL, somebody had asked me probably 6 or 7 potentially years ago now, hey, what are you doing in your classroom for SEL? And I just looked at them and I said, what are you doing? And they gave me some answers. And the reason I did that was because when they said SEL, I really didn't know what they were talking about. And when they gave me the response, some of those things that they mentioned, I was also doing in my classroom. So I said, oh, yeah, I'm doing that too. And then I started to do some research and I found castle.org and I learned about it. And, granted, when I went to college and had my teacher preparation program, that was many, many years ago. And they didn't have then the types of programs they have now. And so I didn't learn about a lot of the things that are talked about in education. And so that example for me became an area of focus because I knew I was doing some things in my classroom, but I wanted to do more. And so what I did was what really started for me to see the benefit and how you can really connect in a meaningful way with your students. And the importance of that is I looked at my classroom one day, all those years ago, and the desks lined up in rows and I had larger classes. And I looked at it and I thought the students are not getting to interact. If they feel uncomfortable asking a question because they're in the back of the room, or if they have a question, they want me to come to them, I can't easily get there. So I moved the desks into stations, not having a clue at whatever I was going to do after that. But then I started to learn. And when I used stations and some different methods, I had students coming to me that were saying, I like Spanish so much better this year. And I'm the only Spanish teacher. So I said, okay, I don't know how I feel about that. And I said, well, why? They said, because I feel like I'm part of a learning community, like a family where I can access you. I'm not doing the same thing as the other students at the same time. I'm getting to know my classmates. And hearing that from them, I thought, wow, like I need to do more of this. And being realistic as a language educator, I know that not all of my students are going to go on to major or minor in Spanish. I hear so often, and you've probably heard this too, or if you even took a language or anybody listening, that, oh, I took X amount of years of whatever language and they don't remember anything. So I started to look at my classroom through a little bit of a different lens. And I thought, okay, I want them to know Spanish and love it because I love teaching it. But what else can I do that's going to prepare them for the future? And looking at, for example, the World Economic Forum and their job skills outlook, so many of the top 10 fall into alignment with the 5 core competencies of SEL. And so I shifted the way that I was teaching to try to, yes, teach them Spanish, of course, but to bring in opportunities where they could build those essential skills because of the importance of having them ready for whatever it is they're going to do when they leave my classroom and leave the schools and go out into the world of work. And so that has become really important for me, and something that I've really enjoyed learning more about because, like, when I was first asked, I didn't really know that much, but I made it a point to learn a lot more because I saw the importance of bringing that into the classroom more.
And it's cool to see how you brought your values of Thrive into that decision-making process. And in the back of my head, as you're walking me through these explanations, I'm thinking about which parts of Thrive factored into some of those decisions you made. And you were quite vulnerable as well in wanting to recognize that a shift needed to happen. And that kind of brings us to the air element, which is the facing of adversity and how we overcome it, kind of getting into the tenacity and the perseverance behind these things. Going to shift topics a little bit though, and I want to ask, balancing law and education, it's a bold ask. So what challenges did you face along the way in balancing the two, and how have they shaped your journey?
Yeah, so I was teaching for, I think in the school where I still am, I've been there, I substitute taught for 3 years, and then I started teaching the current school where I've been for many years and had taught for about 5 years. And I developed an interest in law when I was getting my Spanish degree because I took courses in translation. I also was a huge fan of John Grisham novels and anything related to the law, and just thought about law school, but didn't really think about applying because I was teaching full time and I enjoyed teaching. And I decided to just take the test and see. I got the scores. I'm like, I don't know what these mean. Let it go. Wait a couple of years and then applied because in Pittsburgh, where I got my degree, they have an evening program. And so that was challenging because it was for 4 years, 4 nights a week, and teaching during the day. So I was basically living in school, and that balance was kind of tough. But I think I developed a really good work ethic and a workflow from it, from having to shift from being the teacher. But I've said that had I not had that experience, I do not believe that I would still be in the classroom or doing any of the things or many of the things I'm doing today, because it put me back in the position of being a student. I got to see the importance of relationships and, being a mentor for students. And that's where the vulnerability came in, making mistakes and learning and seeing that, yeah, my students, I get now why they feel uncomfortable, because I felt uncomfortable. And so when I, took the bar exam and passed, I didn't leave the classroom. I stayed because I had this I feel like I've had two beginning years of teaching, like that very first year when I started at the school I'm in, and then the year after I graduated law school, because I shifted the mindset. I saw all of those different values. And that's why it's been 18 years since I graduated from law school at this point, which is a while, but I have used them, and people often ask me, are you using your degree, or why aren't you an attorney? And I say, it comes in handy when you're teaching. It opens your mind to seeing different perspectives and viewpoints. It's really good I took a couple courses in forensics and things. So when somebody says they didn't do something, you're like, well, I can tell by the angle of where that landed, where it came from. It does add some humor into the classroom, but in the work that I do as a consultant and, writing agreements, doing things like that, I use both. I use all of that. And now with doing presentations, well, for the past 7 years with AI, in the past year, I've started to focus on researching AI and the law, because there is so much to unpack there. And so, like I had said earlier, things coming full circle now, it's kind of like wrapping around. So now I'm doing the attorney part with the educator part. And I enjoy it, because my whole motivation is, if I can take time to learn something or have information to provide to somebody else that's going to take that burden off, to reduce that feeling of overwhelm, anything like that. That's why I do what I do. And so finding balance is tough. I don't know that you can ever really achieve balance. So maybe you just have to kind of mix everything together and just put it all into one. But it's pacing. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's important to note that balance doesn't necessarily mean that 50-50 split. It could be leaning more towards the education side at days, more towards the law side at days, be non-existent on certain times of the year as well. It can come and go. Speaking of AI and being well-versed in the law, you're probably well in tune with the debates that are happening right now on the use of AI with everything around us. And so advocating for emerging technologies like AI, it comes with skepticism and resistance. How have you worked through these hurdles to actually utilize it to inspire some change?
Yeah, well, when, we're 2 years plus when ChatGPT came available to the public, and so many changes in education. But I remember that the January of 2023, I guess it was, I had some people reach out to me from school districts. I had a couple of reporters or, journalists say, what do you think? Even other colleagues, both in or out of my school, what are we going to do? We have to shut everything down, lock it down. And I said, we can't do that. That's not the answer, because as educators in our schools, we're in the best position to help our students figure out how to use it. And to do that, we have to dive in and embrace it as well. There are concerns, but we've all heard the, calculator and Google and all these things. And I say, even when I went to high school, you could copy somebody's homework, you could get the answers, you could cheat. Plagiarism is not anything new. And even when digital tools started coming to the classrooms too, I think some of it is just, there are so many things that we're doing as educators and we're responsible for that take up a lot of time. And it's another big kind of oh, here's this other thing now that I have to focus on. And so the work that I've done, anytime I talk with somebody, I'm like, look, it's just one other thing. We've had a lot of things. It seems like every couple of years, there's something new, something different that's going to present a challenge. But we have to model for our students, or if you're in an administrative role, whatever the role is, for those that you work with. I like to say that you lead and learn with, or learn and lead with, but giving examples, sharing stories, but being receptive to what people's concerns are, because that's important too. And I think when somebody says, and I've had teachers say to me, I'm not using any AI in my classroom. And I say, have you ever done a Google search? Like everybody, you can't avoid it at this point, but trying to help people see what some of the benefits are, but keeping in mind that there are tons of possibilities, but there's also a lot of responsibilities. And listening, not judging, all of these different things. I mean, it's really helped me. And that's kind of why I'm doing more with the AI and the law too, is learning about what are the legal implications and the ethical considerations that teachers need to be, well, anybody needs to be aware of. But the biggest part, going back to like storytelling and sharing stories, is just listening, reading a lot, and then having stories and examples to share with others, because I'm in the classroom too. Like, I understand it. I hear a lot from other educators, not just from my school, but from different networks I'm involved in. And so the more that I listen, it helps me to think through of what is something, even just some small piece of advice that I can offer, or, pose a question that makes them like, okay, let me think about that for a little bit. Because it's not about, I don't want to say I'm right, you're wrong. It's not about that at all. It's, can we see this in a different way? Like baby steps, I guess.
Absolutely. And it probably connects so well with those ISTE standards. It's an important thing to teach the responsible use of it. It's a really powerful tool. And, you do have to be careful along the lines of, is it pulling from public domain sources? Is it pulling from things that you're now plagiarizing? You have to do some background check when using it to make sure that you're not pulling it from information. It's not word for word information that's been grabbed from somewhere else. It's giving you something unique. Recognizing what it gives you, you also have no right to copyright because it wasn't created by a human. So there's so many factors to unpack with AI. And that kind of brings us to the water element here, which talks a little bit about change and change dynamics and how to bring that about. And you've mentioned the struggling teacher that might be resistant to the AI, and you've been at the forefront of AI and emerging technologies. What advice would you give to teachers that are just starting to implement these tools in their classroom?
Yeah, so I usually, anytime I've done, and this has been for 7 years, I've done the same thing. I've always used a survey to find out where, are you using it? Are you not? What are your concerns? And the best advice that I've come up with over at least the last year and a half or so is telling teachers to get a Post-it note, piece of paper, whatever, and jot down things that they need to do, whether it's a clerical task or if it's that thing that you have to teach again that you've tried 15 different ways and nothing has worked really well, or whatever. And just make a list of the things that take up a ton of time, take you away from your students, or whatever it is. And then after you have your list, then pick one of the tools that are out there. Maybe you heard about one from a colleague, maybe your school is using one and you're going to go in and then see for yourself how many of those things on that list that you wrote that you can check off. And the one thing is, assume that you're going to use ChatGPT or one of the other large language models, because that's a given. They're available, you can use them, but in terms of education, having something that's a platform that is in compliance and data privacy and all of that is super important. So schools may already have something in place, and teachers are going to be apprehensive. It's not something new, because we get used to, and I say we because I'm like that, we get used to doing things the way maybe we've always done them, or things that have worked, and there's never enough time. That's the number one thing that I hear from teachers is, when do I find the time? And that's the best part about AI is when it's used in a way that's going to help you to save time that can be then spent with your students. So going back to that list, picking a tool, and maybe it's ChatGPT, although being careful not to put in personally identifiable information of any sort, no matter how insignificant it might seem. But that might be the tool to start with if you haven't tried it. And there are still some educators that I've spoken with that, as of middle of the summer of 2024, had not tried any. I mean, not just ChatGPT, but any of them. And I found that a little bit surprising. But in some cases, there's not training. don't know where to start, and just didn't dive in. So that's my best advice.
I love that. One of the places I start with my teachers is take a plan and think of the diverse kids in your classroom. And without having to differentiate your plan, throw that into your OpenAI source and ask it, hey, can you differentiate this to 1 or 2 grade levels below, 1 grade level above? And now you're going to get a plan made that spans all the diverse learners in your classroom. You're not going to disclose the names of your learners. You're not going to disclose the ages, the location. You're just going to put your plan in and ask it to differentiate for you. Great starting piece. It stops you from having to think about how can I differentiate this. You as the professional need to still vet it and make sure it's accurate, still aligned to curriculum, things are going to work. But you'll find that usually it's pretty on par. It might need a tweak here or there. And if you get the right prompts in, it can give you exactly what you're looking for quite quickly. And as you mentioned, save a ton of time on just those clerical tasks that seem to take so long to do. Now, with that, your workshops and books emphasize strategies for engaging students through innovative practices, and we're encouraging teachers to use this AI source and to use technology to try to create these engaging practices to help save time on the logistics side of things. What's one change that you've seen that's had the biggest impact on student engagement?
Well, in my classroom, there are a couple of different tools that I used that put the AI in the hands of the students. And I mean, students for years, they love playing games and all those things. They're always on the phones. But as a language educator, I want my students to build their speaking skills, and they're hesitant to speak out in class for fear of making mistakes. And I tell them, like, we make mistakes in English all the time. I mean, nobody's perfect. It's fine. And with AI especially, we want them to understand how to use it safely, ethically, and responsibly. And so with my students in all my levels of Spanish and the STEAM course that I teach, there are 2 different tools that I use. That one of them got them to respond, and it recorded. It gave them AI generated feedback right on their phone instantly because I had prompted it, because everything comes down to the prompting, no matter what tool you're using. I mean, you can actually spend double the time or more if you don't get the right prompt. So you want to work on prompting. So that was something that really got the students engaged. And then the other one was the use of a chatbot. And I created different chatbots, and they each had their own experience, answering questions, typing in. And I worked with it before I set it free for them to use to break the system, because the students are going to try to get around whatever the focus of it is, because that's what they do. That's what I would do. And that really was, they came in the next day, like, are we doing that again? Can we do that again? Asking for that. And they've done that before for different games, all the different games that are out there that we're all, probably all use and have been using for probably almost 10 years now. But as a language teacher, for me, and student engagement is something else that I was completely wrong about years ago. I thought just because they were smiling and laughing and having a great time playing that game, they were engaged in learning. And then I'm like, yeah, that's not it. So then figured that one out. But those activities that we did really did make a difference. And I even had some students give me some quotes to share in conferences and things about what their take was, where they felt like the AI was working with them, which it was. And one student who always would say, nope, call on somebody else. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to speak out in Spanish, said it helped me to get to where I need to be. And I felt more comfortable interacting and responding with this chatbot. And then in class, I pay attention more because I understood it. Like, it helped me and it tutored me and it gave me the practice that I needed. So then from then on, it was like wow. And I think too, a lot of times they think that the educators don't know about AI or certain things. Like, they don't have a clue that we're using ChatGPT. We know. People ask all the time about, AI detectors and things. And I said, when you know your students, like, you can tell, but embracing it and letting them use it in class and just seeing the benefits and learning with them too, because we'll see what their reaction is. And then if you have that list, and one of the things is student engagement, like trying one of those and seeing if it works for you. But those were the biggest in the last year and a half or so, is like really putting it in the hands of the students and letting them have their own individualized experience. And then getting feedback from them, because that's really important as well.
And you're so right on the plagiarism checkers and the prompting and the importance behind that. I recently worked with somebody who was using OpenAI as a plagiarism checker, and they were saying, "Hey, read this and let me know what elements of it could be plagiarized," and it's going to tell you what could be. And now I said, "Well, give it the prompt now and ask it to make an argument on how it was authentically written," and the reverse is done, right? It'll make an argument on how this was authentically written. It will do what you prompt it to do.
Right.
So you have to be cautious in what you're asking your AI to do. And I hope people listening, if you're not in the education world, AI has so many tools that could be used in whatever workplace you're in. We used the example of writing down those managerial tasks that take time and draw you away from what you really want to be doing in whatever place you're in. Just make note of writing those down. And outside of education, think of those prompts, think of leveraging that use of AI to reduce your times. Now, with all of that, there is so much opportunity to continue learning about what this brings, what this does, how to create engaging and emerging practices through the use of technology. How do you approach the professional development you offer to ensure that not just educators, but leaders and people in other organizations, they feel confident and supported in implementing these new practices?
Yeah, so one thing that I started to do, and I mentioned before, is the use of surveys, because conferences or anything, it's a little bit different when you're doing like a PD session for a school, because you go into that knowing what they want, what they're using, what they need. But that's, as a school, I still use surveys in those. So I find out what the teachers, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's your comfort in this case with AI? And I have a list of different tools that are, besides ChatGPT, have you used any of these? And the questions that I ask. And if I can, I share that ahead of time, but I look at it, I always have a second device. I look at it in real time to see, so I can anticipate. And then that helps me to better prepare for the people that are in the room, or if it's a virtual, in the virtual space or wherever, if it's a recording, same thing, I still use it. But it helps me to learn too, which is important, because I want to keep learning and know what are some of the challenges and concerns that I might not be aware of. And so that's the first step. And then the second step is kind of acknowledging that, because I understand, because I am in the classroom, and then trying to find things that will be beneficial for educators, regardless of content area, grade level, years of experience in teaching, knowledge about the use of technology, any of those things, and try to kind of talk them through. And not so much like, it's funny, there's the word balance. It doesn't have to be 50-50, like you said, which I loved, but finding something that, or like a middle ground, kind of, where if you have people, and in all the PD sessions, you have some people who may have never used the technology, then you have people that have been, they're at the forefront, they're doing it, and then everything in between. And so being able to offer something for everybody is sometimes difficult. But at the end of the day, the main thing that I focus on is looking at where they are now. And then I try to think about tools, methods, strategies, because for years doing presentations, it was always about, here's this tool. And we all know that they disappear, the features change, they become paid, whatever. And so you can't always rely on the different tools. So I started to focus on methods and strategies. But of course, now with AI, you can still do that same thing, but giving them some tangible steps, resources, understanding where they're coming from. And then if I have the opportunity, working with it, and I'm always available. I always say, like, you can, if you have a question today, tomorrow, next month, next year, whatever, like, just send me a message and I will support you if I don't know the answer. Cause I always say, I don't know all the answers. I'm not an expert. If I don't know the answer now, I will find an answer, or I'll find somebody that has an answer for you. But I try to really make it something that's interactive, and that the educators know that if they need some help, have some questions, if it's from me, of course, or I provide the school or whoever with some resources, because we've all been through PD. And so often the one thing that I've heard when I did some research was that teachers are often trained on a new tool or a whole system or something, and the follow-up after that, like, it's not there. And with something like AI especially, and you mentioned earlier too, vetting, don't just take for granted and say, oh, the company is totally in compliance and everybody's using this. Always look to make sure that they are in compliance. But the training, that part of it, needs to be consistent so the teachers continue to feel supported. And I know not every school has a tech coach or somebody in some similar, position, because there's so many different names for people that do that type of work. And so you want to make sure you have support there. And so I, on my end, offer my support as much as I can. And people do reach out to me. But also I recommend, finding somebody within your school that is like your partner that you can work with, because that's important as well. Although that's another thing it's hard to find the time for.
Yeah. And Rachelle, it's so well spoken, but I'll push back on one thing you said, and that's saying you're not an expert in claiming that. And I would say that you are. And it's okay for experts to say, I also don't know that, but we'll source it to another expert for an answer. So hold yourself to high standards there as well, because I think you're doing incredible things with the work around technology, AI, and the infusion you're bringing in your professional development that you're offering. With that, though, we are going to shift a little bit to the fire element, which is our last element we'll talk about today. And that's the decision making, the risk taking, and being bold. And for a lot of people, getting into new technology is a risk. It is a bold decision for them to do because it's a scary thing. As we mentioned earlier here, Rachelle, that when you try something, you often get shown it once and then it doesn't get revisited, and then you're kind of left in the dark around that. What risks do you see educators needing to take to truly unlock AI's potential, and how can they make sure they're doing it responsibly?
Yeah. So, the first thing is, if you are somebody who has not yet used ChatGPT or any of the tools, you have to, because it's not going away. It's been around since the middle of the 1900s. And I mentioned the World Economic Forum, like the Job Skills Outlook for 2027, AI is listed as number 3. And so if we are preparing our students for future success, it's going to be involving a lot of AI, and it's the number one skill that's in demand. And I forget the percentage, but it was somewhere around 75% of employers were saying that over the next 5 years, they're going to continue to increasingly look for potential employees that are skilled or understand AI. And many areas, especially in the law, I see news reports all the time about how the legal interns, paralegals are being asked to use the AI. And that's great, but they still need to understand how to make sure that information is accurate, because it does hallucinate and it makes up some ridiculous things. And so when it comes to, in teaching, we have to take risks, and this is coming from somebody that didn't take risks for a very long time, but I see there's so many benefits in it. And with AI, you have to try something and bring it into your classroom. And more importantly, depending on the grade level you work with, because there is a concern about kids that are young getting on the technology so much and the over-reliance on it, but bringing in activities where you're learning with your students and continuing to learn. And like you said, when you push back on me a little bit about being an expert, like even in the language that I teach, I would often, students would ask a question, and I don't know all the words in English, let alone Spanish, which is my third language. And they say, but you're a Spanish teacher, you should know everything. We can't possibly know everything. And if we only teach our students the knowledge that we have, like our own knowledge base, we're limiting their growth as well. And so you really have to just dive in and say, and I've said to my students, like, I don't know if it's going to go well or not. Or I'll say, I think that was the worst idea I've had. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, it really wasn't that good. And I laugh. Like 10, 15 years ago, I would have never said something like that. But if I did, and I got the response I did, I probably would have been offended by it. But it's good for them to see that we're taking risks and we don't know how it's going to go. And also bringing it in and taking a risk of using it, and you see, well, you know what? It didn't really work well in my classroom with my students, or this actually took me triple the time it would have taken me to do it without the AI. Like you have to just try something different and see how it goes, so that and not be afraid of it, because like it's all around us. I presented a conference earlier. Well, it was months ago, and it was a room full of people. And my question I always ask is, what's the first thing you think of when you hear AI? And that answer has changed over the last 2 years as opposed to the first 5 years. In the first 5 years, number one answer was Terminator. And now it's more ChatGPT. But this particular conference, there was a woman in the middle of the room and she threw up both hands and she said, danger, danger, danger. And I laughed so hard because I thought of a very old TV show where that's what the robot said, but she was really nervous about it. And the problem was that she didn't know where to begin and just was afraid to do the wrong thing, not sure about what information to put in, how to use it. And at the end of the session, I said, how are you feeling? You still danger, danger, danger? And she's like, danger, danger? So she came down. So she said, and I said, well, what made the difference? She said, well, you explained some things. I get it more. She said, and while you were talking, and I tried some things and I saw what I could do with it. She said, I just didn't understand it. And that's what you have to do. So you just have to dive in, see what happens. So I don't know. That's the best I've got.
Yeah, you have to recognize that you're going to start incompetent at using AI. And the only way to get better and to learn from it is to go from that incompetence to competence. And then once you become a little competent, guess what? There's a whole nother part of it to unlock and you're going to become incompetent again. Right. Speaking of the hallucinations, I even tried my own little experiments with it. I've asked AI to find me 5 scholarly peer-reviewed articles on something, and it will spit out 5 articles. And then I ask it for DOI links to them. And one of them is a legitimate article, right? And the other 4 that it's given me are fabricated articles from real researchers, but you cannot find the titles. You can't find the journal it's used. So you really have to vet them and make sure you're working. So I don't use it to find myself scholarly articles, and I stick to public inventory searches. And if I am using it, I am asking it for its DOI source. I am asking it for its website link, and I am going to it and I'm fact checking. I know aside from ChatGPT, this is a little bit off script here, but I know aside from ChatGPT, I think Gemini is another one that you can use. And usually when you ask it for things, that one provides you the citations. And I've noticed that with OpenAI, ChatGPT is starting to provide some citations on where it's pulling information from, which tells you that it's also something that's learning too, right? It's growing, it's developing, it's getting better. And we keep talking about this idea of being an expert in something, and ChatGPT is the expert in being a language model system. And so is Gemini in being a language model system. But just like anybody with a PhD or a doctorate, you're an expert in a very, very specific field of a broader general category. And so when people ask these experts questions, it will not know sometimes because it is very specific into what it does know. But what we're really good at is if you are somebody trained in being a leader, being an expert, being an OpenAI source, is you go and learn and find that information to make yourself better at it, but also to help make others better at it too. Right. So with that, I have to ask, what's next for you?
Well, side note, I have to tell you something funny because you mentioned about the hallucinations, and I'm going off script. There's no script, but I'm going off script, and I'm saying I asked it to write a bio about me a year before I got my doctorate, and I was on a call with my professor, my program director, and he said, "Did you ever have it write your bio?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, it didn't come up with anything for me." And I said, "Oh, that's kind of odd." So I had it write one for me, and everything was spot on, except it said that I had a PhD in curriculum and instruction, and I was an associate professor at some university. And I said, well, I guess my work's done here because everything on the internet is true. And it's like, you're curious where it got that information from. And before we were talking here today, I typed in a couple months ago, I did the prompt based on everything that you know about me. What is something I might not know about myself? And it gave me I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But today I did, based on what you know about me, generate an image. And it generated an image, and it had like AI, and it had the law, and it had a classroom full of students. But I was a man teaching in the front of the room. So anyway, so what's next for me is, there's actually a pun in that, because the course that I teach in STEAM, I named it What's Next in Emerging Technology. Hey. And so because I was teaching about coding hummingbird robots when I first started the STEAM class, probably 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, and I was terrible at it, but that didn't matter because the kids were great at it. And so the third year in, when I was a little bit better, they said they were moving that to a different grade, and what did I want to teach? And that's when I named AI, AR, VR, coding, all of those topics. And they said, pick just one. I'm like, I can't do it. So I said, I want to teach all the things. So I made up that course. And so the thing that's next is my next book comes out in April, and I had just finished the final round of edits. And it's called, I made up the title on the way home from work one day. It's called What the Tech, about a year and a half ago. And it's about, has AI, has augmented virtual reality, metaverse, Web3, blockchain, and cybersecurity. So that's next for me, and some just training and conferences. And I don't know if I write another book, but just continued learning for sure. Everybody says, you need to take a break. I'm like, why? Like, there are so many things to do and so many things to learn, and it's fun. So that's kind of what's next for me, is just using that and hopefully helping other educators and trying some new things in my classroom, especially with the cybersecurity. That's been an area that I've wanted to learn even more about. So that's probably what's next.
Very cool. And congratulations on the upcoming book. That's another
Thank
exciting
you.
moment. Now, I kind of mentioned this a bit earlier in the show, but how can people listening get in touch with you?
I'm very consistent when it comes to contacting me, because when I made my first email address, it was with AOL. So I followed what my parents did, and I use part of my name. So it's RDENE 915, which is my birth date. So it's RDENE 915, and that's on X or Twitter. It's on Blue Sky, Instagram, all of those. If you want to send me an email, just add the Gmail to it, and my blog site, just put the www and the .com around it. And also on that site, if anybody wants to have me work with them as like a one-on-one coach or anything like that, I have all the information. And I am always seeking guest bloggers. So if anybody listening has something you're doing in your classroom, please share your story with me, because everybody can learn from like our own story. And somebody years ago said, but why would I write something? And I said, even if you help just one person, it might just be the one person that needed that at that time. So yeah, and on LinkedIn. So I'm in all the spaces, and if I can answer questions or if you can teach me something, please reach out.
I love that. And one final thought here for anybody listening, if you can give one piece of advice on where to go, what to start, what to consider, what would that be?
Oh, geez. When it comes to AI?
Anything.
Anything. Oh, I would say, gosh, that's a big question. The best advice I would give would be, you have to connect. And I come back to that because, and that's very broad, and that could be taken in a lot of different ways, like connect online, connect an account, connect with people. But teaching can be so isolating. And for years, I kind of kept to myself. When I first started teaching, I was struggling with a lot of things like newer teachers struggle with, but I was afraid to ask for help. I didn't have, we didn't have the PLNs that we have now, all these different communities. There's great organizations. And maybe that's the best answer, is there are, whatever state you're in, you probably have a state organization. ISTE, you mentioned, I've been a member of ISTE for probably 10 years now as well. And I've gotten to meet so many people over the years that I've learned so much from. And what's more important than my own professional growth and personal growth from all of that is what I've been able to bring into my classroom and share with my students, with other teachers. And so connect is the word that came to mind first, because like you can't do it alone. And that's even with students. Like, don't be afraid to learn. Like when they teach us something, they get so excited. And I love that. So make a connection today.
I love that. And alchemists, as we wrap up our episode with Dr. Rachelle Dené Poth, I want to take a moment and share my appreciation for your listenership. You're the reason we're here. You're the inspiration for the show. And I hope our journey today sparked some points of interest for you. To dive deeper, make sure you subscribe to our monthly newsletter for scholarly insights, actionable strategies, and an in-depth analysis of each episode. Reach out to our Instagram, check out our YouTube, DM me for any links that you want to get. And Rachelle, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your schedule to connect, collaborate, and empower us all through your lived experiences.
Yeah, well, thank you for the time to talk with you and share stories.
You've been listening to The Elemental Educator. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator.